Hey everybody, welcome to our podcast. So glad you're joining in with us today. You're going to be super blessed and I think really encouraged and enlightened as you hear Liz and I just talking about our journey with our own kids and being able to talk to them about sex. This is one of the most challenging things that people deal with when it comes to their kids, but I believe God really will give you the wisdom to be able to do this, to do it with grace, and to be able to see your kids grow up in purity and to help them be able to tackle the issues that we have today. And so be encouraged as you hear this conversation.
So we're starting this conversation with a question that we ended our last conversation with, which is about shame. And how, if we're dealing with shame as parents, how are we to not bring shame into a conversation that we want to have with our children, especially about sex, especially about this taboo topic that, you know, people aren't having conversations about. Well, the world is having a conversation about it, but as believers who want to be leading the conversation, how do we do that? How do we create a shame-free environment?
So you're asking the right question. And first off, let me say that you can't lead somebody into something that you haven't gone into yourself. So leaders have to go there first. They're leading the way. And so if as a parent, as an adult, especially when you're talking about with your children, if you are trying to lead them in a conversation free of shame, but you yourself are dealing with shame, it's not going to work. So there's a couple things I would say to that. Number one is if you're dealing with shame because it just feels funny to have the conversation with your kids, but you know you need to, well then you just go past it.
That's right.
Because that's kind of a shame is tied to fear.
That's
and
right.
Sometimes it's not about getting rid of the fear, it's just about stepping up in courage. But if you're dealing with shame because you're doing shameful things, then you need to get free, because the older generations are supposed to be leading the younger generations into greater freedom. And
That's
so if
right.
they themselves are still bound, they need to get free. And so I would say to anybody that is bound in any kind of sexual addiction, perversion, there is freedom available.
That's right.
And the simple answer I would say is get in the Word of God and let the Word of God set you free. Break off. There could be things tied to you spiritually that you just need to break free from, that will help you step into freedom. But ultimately, the Word of God says, "Thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against thee." So the Word of God, and we will guard it in our hearts; it will guard us.
That's good.
So, just very simply and just very quickly, let me say, if you're dealing with any kind of freedom, needing freedom, that you're in bondage, then you need to make sure that you are free. Otherwise, you can't lead other people into freedom. And if you are a person that is dealing with bondage and you want your kids to not walk in the same bondage you're in, which no decent parent would, you are going to find, instead of leading your kids into freedom and helping them walk free from shame and be able to make good choices, teaching them to make good choices, you're going to end up controlling them. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be free so that you can teach them to be free.
That's right.
Because what happens is that when people aren't in control of themselves, they'll often try to control other people. And the problem that we have is that we are free people, especially once we're born again. I mean, we really are free in every sense of the word. I mean, if you live in a country like America, you're really free. But you have to learn how to live free. The children of Israel, they came out of bondage. They got delivered from Egypt, which is a type and a shadow of sin. Mm-hmm. And Pharaoh was crushed under the water, and his whole army was crushed. But then they got out into the desert, and they didn't know how to be free. And they went through a season, and it was supposed to be a short season, but it ended up being 40 years. And they went through this season where they were saying, well, back in Egypt, we had cucumbers, and we had leeks, and we had our needs met. Yeah, we were in bondage, but at least we had some of our needs met. And that's how a lot of people are.
There was comfort in their bondage.
Yeah. And so that's how a lot of people are, is they get into freedom, but they don't know how to live free.
That's right.
And so we have to learn how to live as free people. So then, crossing that, once you've crossed that barrier and you yourself are free, you're walking in freedom, you're walking in purity, if you want to say it that way, then you have to just be able to go and have the conversations with them and complete. You don't need to be goofy about it, but you need to be able to just freely, openly say, let's talk about these things. And when you're dealing with your children, which is what we're talking about here, is that we have a responsibility to talk to our kids about one of the most important topics. And it's the thing, I mean, look how the enemy has so blinded the church. Because if there is one sin that runs rampant in the church, it's sexual sin. Mm-hmm. If there's only one, that's the one you'd pick. It is the most prevalent. People deal with, teenagers deal with sexual problems, adults deal with it. And when teenagers don't get free, they carry it right over into their married life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people think, once I get married, especially boys, dealing with all these hormones and stuff, once I get married, everything will be fine. Not so, because, a lot of these things are like, they're iniquity, they're strongholds. It's not about, oh, no, I have a wife and, we can have sex, so I won't have a desire for anything else. It's not true. You can still partake of your wife and then still be dealing with other things on the side. It shouldn't be. We should learn how to live in freedom. And if we don't have people, sometimes we just need to have people take us by the hand and say, let me show you how to do this. Let me show you how to not only step into freedom, but literally walk and live your life free. But if you're still dealing with shame yourself because of bondage that you are still in, you're not going to get rid of the shame until you get rid of the bondage.
That's right.
And if you are trying to compensate for shame, you're going to end up controlling. And we just can't do it that way. We have to get free, walk free, and then help other people step into freedom. But we have to be able to have these conversations with our children that are, so here's the thing, is that I've had conversations more with the boys, because we have 4 boys. I've had more of the conversations than you have, just because I'm a man. It's better fitting. Although you and I have plenty of conversations that we intentionally embarrass them a little bit, which is kind of fun. But I'll just say a couple things that I've done with them as far as the actual conversations and what they've looked like. So the very first time I remember our 2 oldest, I was out fishing with them, and we weren't catching any fish, which was pretty normal, but it was a pretty nice day. We were just sitting out there, and I said, guys, do you know how fish make babies? And because they were pretty young, they were probably, 8 and 11 maybe then, or maybe a little bit older than that. But and I had to think, wait a second, how do fish make babies? And the younger one said, he said, well, they get married. And then the older one said, oh, yeah, right. Like there's a chapel underneath of the water that they go in there and just get married. So the older one had a little bit of a clue that it was more than just about getting married. And so I felt like that kind of opened the door up to be able to talk about those things. And of course, we started having conversations with them about sperm and egg and those kind of things. But then there came a point to where it was like, you looked at me, you're like, you got to have the conversation. I was like, I got to have the conversation. And so I was a little bit afraid, because it was challenging. It's, it is a private thing, but it shouldn't be a shameful thing.
That's right.
Right. So
why was it challenging? For you personally,
For me personally, I think because I had never talked to any of my kids on the level that I eventually did talk to them. And so it was kind of like I was afraid of how they were going to respond.
Right.
Maybe a little bit of fear of maybe certain questions they would ask me that would be difficult for me to answer. But I just had to go into it and say, this is right for me as their dad to talk to them about this.
So you didn't let that stop you. So you had courage.
It probably hindered me for a couple months, but I did not let it stop me.
Because ultimately, I think you knew and it's your responsibility
That's exactly right.
the parent to begin the conversation so that more conversations can happen.
Yeah.
To just continue to lead them and guide them. Like, we only have so much time with our kids in our home. And if we're unwilling to have one of the most important conversations with them, then, why would they want to come have other conversations with us, you know, if we're unwilling to go to like a real deep place with them,
Yeah.
and provide that safe place,
Yeah.
and you know you're on their side and you're for them, you're not against them. It's not your desire to control them. It's not your desire to even instill any fear around this. It's your desire to bring truth,
Right.
so that they can continue to live in the light.
Yeah. So for boys in particular, this is how I phrase it. It's about teaching them to conduct their vessels with honor.
Yeah.
Because they are going to conduct their vessels. It's true for male and female, but men in particular are so driven sexually that when you have young boys that you don't give them any kind of instruction, they can without. It's almost like when you have little boys that they'll get trucks, and instinctively
They know.
they're
Yeah.
you don't even have to teach them. They'll often make guns and knives,
Right.
with no prior knowledge of guns or knives. It's just in them. They're warriors and they're tough, but they're also highly sexually driven. And if you don't tell them anything, they're going to find out things on their own anyways. They're going to figure it out. So what are they going to figure out? How are they going to think about it? What's their filter going to look like? What's
That's
their
right.
perspective going to be on it? What boundaries are going to be set in place for them? And so this is why we have, like you said something that's very good, that it is our responsibility as parents. So for parents that are just like, well, they'll figure it out. I figured it out. My dad, well, here, we're all here. We all figured it out. That's, you're just leaving room for the devil to come in and speak perversion to your child.
That's right.
You're essentially asking for the devil through the world to come in and teach your kids about sex.
Actually, I think you're just opening the door for it. Like, it's going to be a given because they're going to learn and they're curious about their sexuality.
Yeah.
And if we're not the ones to teach and instruct and guide, then they'll figure out a way to be taught and instructed and guided.
Yeah.
And we should want that to come from us. We're teaching them, and we're supposed to be teaching them and instructing them and guiding them in other things. Why not this thing? It's one of the most important things. It is actually the thing that, sexuality and sex is the thing that can ruin people and families.
Oh, yeah. Many families are destroyed because of adultery, pornography, all those kind of things.
Right. Yeah. And so we've just, because we haven't stepped up and taken responsibility and said, and say, I'm going to be the one that teaches and leads and guide this. You open the door for somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
And who do we think? We can't be naive to think that it's going to be the Lord or somebody good that's going to teach them about their sexuality.
It's a shot in the dark to think that. Yeah.
That is naive.
Yeah.
And it's wrong. They're going to learn it from the world.
Yeah,
literally. There's so much access right now.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And they're going to go to where they have access.
Speaking of that, one of the mistakes that parents do is they completely shut their children off from the world. And when you do that, you're basically saying, there's a verse, and it's in 1 Corinthians 15, I think it's 56, it says the strength of sin is the law. So when you tell your kids, don't watch this, you can't watch TV, you lay down all these things, and you give them no instruction, no understanding, I guarantee you, your kids are going to come in contact with the world. Unless you live in a bunker somewhere in the middle of the sticks and you have no electronic devices, which if you're hearing this, that's not true of you. So your kids are going to come in contact with the things of the world. Who better to help them? Not saying you should go and let your kids watch, R-rated movies and, bad stuff, and you certainly would never show them pornography. Although there are parents that show their kids pornography. I know of parents that have done that. You don't do that kind of stuff. That's garbage. But what you do is you help them take what is in the world and help them navigate it with honor, help them navigate it with truth.
That's right.
To where they stay on the right side of things, and you are there to help them clearly identify. It's essential.
It is essential.
And it's our job.
Right. And by you being the first mention, by you telling them these things, then they're not, like, their system isn't shocked when they hear it or see it from the world, that they're like,
So then
I don't know what to do.
A great question comes in, and I don't know that we've done this perfect, because the idea of first mention really is a great idea.
Yeah.
But kids are, and we are protective over what our kids watch, especially when they're really little. We're
Right.
very protective over that. But kids are exposed to things, innuendos, not full blown bad stuff, but at least innuendos at a very young age. And it was the same from when we were younger. I think about a Pepe Le Pew, the Skunks. You know, he was I think he had one woman, but he was a one womanizer. And Betty Boop. And even like Popeye, like Olive Oil, and even though she's a skinny little whatever, like there was a little bit of an infatuation with her skinny little body, and just there's all these innuendos that are there. So first mention, it's pretty hard for it to come sometimes from the parents. As far as like innuendo things, you have to just be really, really careful. But as far as sitting down and having real conversation, if you will do that, you will just solve a lot of problems for your kids and set things on the right path. So the question I think that is good to ask is how do you actually have the conversation? There's more detail than I would go into, that I did go into with my boys, and what I would do in a setting like this. But this is what I did. First of all, I asked somebody who had, Ron Johnson. They've got 12 kids. Ron and Wendy have 12 kids, and so I asked him. I said, give me, because I think they have 5 boys or 7 boys. They have 7 and 5. I forget. 5 boys, 7 girls. So I said, you've done this a lot. I said, why don't you give me some pointers or whatever. And so he gave me some thoughts and some ideas about how to instruct it. And so I took some of that, and then also prayed and just asked the Lord. And I ended up bringing them.
So you asked somebody who had wisdom.
Yeah.
Had wisdom.
That's a good way to do it.
Above you.
And good fruit.
Yes.
Yeah. And both of those things are there in his life, in both of their lives, Ron and Wendy's. But so I took some things that he shared, and more than anything, I just got a boldness, like just talk to him about it, And so then I brought him up to my office, and I'll never forget. After about an hour of conversation, I was like, "Why are you guys so quiet?" And they were both like, "Can we please be done, Dad? This is so bad. It's so awful." And it was challenging, but it was important. And so I just took them up to my office, and I pulled out markers on the whiteboard, and I drew stick figures. And I drew a stick figure of a woman, and I drew her body parts on there. And then I drew a man, and I said, "Here's the man." And I said, when his eyes, and I drew dotted lines, look to, and I pointed down to the crotch area and to the chest area. I said, when his eyes go there, then this is what happens to his body. And they were mortified that I was drawing such things on the whiteboard. But they heard it from me. And I got to tell them, God made your body this way. Now what you do with it, you have to make the right decisions to do the right thing, to keep your eyes in the right place, and to make sure that you're conducting your vessel with honor. But I got to talk to them about it. They heard it from me from a right perspective. Did I do it all right? No. Should I have said some things different? Sure. Am I still probably needing to open up and have more conversations? Probably. Yeah. So, and then we've got 2 more that I'll probably sit them down about the same time as well. And talk to them about it. We'll see how that goes. But you have to have the conversations. And I remember growing up with this one family, and they were a very different family than ours, and they were the kind that kind of cut themselves off from the world completely. And I can't totally condemn that idea because they have good fruit in their family. I don't really agree with that. I think there's a balance. Moderation is not one extreme or the other, but it's in the middle. We're supposed to do things modestly or in moderation. But I can remember talking to their kids when we were little, and they would talk about sex sometimes almost explicitly. Well, they did sometimes with too much detail, but there wasn't a huge perversion behind it. And I
Right.
was like, so your dad talks to you about this? He's like, oh yeah, we sit around the dinner table and sometimes they'll just talk to us about sex and how babies are made. And when I heard that, that stuck with me. And I can remember thinking, when I have kids, I'm not going to make such a big deal about it, but I am going to talk to them about it. Now, I don't sit around the dinner table. That's different. But to make it secret, that's the point. To make it secret is to make a big deal about it, because everybody already knows it exists. Talk about it.
That's right.
Make the conversations happen so that people can walk
And create
free and walk in purity and in truth.
a safe place for them to have the conversation.
That's right.
To feel like they can come to us and talk to us.
Yeah.
Because we have gotten rid of the shame and any condemnation.
That's right.
And we say, actually, our heart is to teach you, instruct you, and then help you continue to stay free.
And this is the thing I would say to parents too, is that especially when you have boys and you're dealing with boy things, don't bring them into punishment.
Right.
You can't punish them. You can, but you should not punish them for them. Now, maybe you need to set some boundaries. If they're dealing with stuff on their devices, you might just need to take their devices away from them. But you got to do whatever you do. You can't do it as in you're doing something bad. They're doing what feels normal to do because God created art. Now, they might be doing it outside of bounds, especially if it's like pornography or something. But so they might be doing it outside of bounds, but they're doing things in a vein of how God made them. And I can remember when I was, much, much younger, late teens, early 20s. And especially with me and you when we were dating, we had plenty of problems, and we won't get into that. But I remember thinking, I've got a demon in me. I'm demon possessed. I remember thinking that I'm demon possessed. I remember trying to cast demons out of me, and I did it because I was so driven by my hormones and I didn't know what to do. And I just thought it's more than just me really wanting Liz and just in general struggling. It's got to be demonic. It wasn't demonic. It was how God made me. I just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So, and that's not any slight against my parents or anything. My parents came out of just ridiculousness growing up and brought me into so much. This is one area probably that they'd had a few more years before they started having kids. They might have come into some of this wisdom. So I don't blame them at all. But I just didn't know what to do, So I decided when I have kids, I'm going to tell them what to do, how to do it. I should say it that way. So, yeah, biggest thing is remove the shame, open up the conversation, start to have God's perspective on it, have the biblical view on it. Don't bring your kids into any kind of judgment or punishment, and start the conversation and watch the Lord work amongst them.
That's right.
It'll be good.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation. We hope this has and will continue to encourage you in your marriage and family. Don't forget to download and comment and share this episode. You can check out Ward Ministries at wardmen.org. If you have any questions, please email us at info@wardmen.org. Keep your eye out weekly for our latest conversation on marriage and family.